Big Tobacco lied about cancer. Back in the day, people genuinely believed smoking was harmless. Doctors even showed up in cigarette ads looking like they had just finished a lung checkup and rewarded themselves with a smooth, rich puff of deception. But behind the scenes, Big Tobacco knew the truth as early as the 1940s and 50s. This is because their research showed a clear link between smoking and lung cancer, and the evidence that proved this was stacking up faster than cigarette butts in an ashtray. So what did tobacco companies do? They denied, and even paid scientists to muddy up the waters. According to them, smoking wasn't responsible for lung cancer, but air pollution and even genetics. To further solidify the lies, they launched misleading ad campaigns and manipulated research. Basically, if a study suggested cigarettes were harmful, Big Tobacco had it buried faster than a mob hit. They were literally gaslighting the entire planet while raking in billions. Well, by the 1960s, the jig was up. The U.S. Surgeon General's report in 1964 made it official. Smoking causes lung cancer. However, Big Tobacco, still clutching their cigars like stress balls, didn't give up, but just got craftier. They pushed filtered and light cigarettes to make smokers think they were safer, and even marketed to kids using cartoon mascots like Joe Camel. Yes, a literal cartoon camel was used to hook future lung cancer patients. When it looked like the government was still onto them, they delayed regulation for decades, forcing lawsuits, lobbying politicians, and acting shocked every time new evidence came out, like a murderer surprised to find fingerprints at the crime scene. It wasn't until 1998 that Big Tobacco finally had to admit they'd been lying all along. They were forced into the Master Settlement Agreement, paying billions in damages and agreeing to stop targeting kids. The CIA and the coup in Iran, 1953. All right, gentlemen, we need to overthrow a government, but we gotta do it quietly. Covert ops? Assassinations? Cyber warfare? No. We're gonna bribe some people, hire fake protesters, spread lies in the newspapers, and hope for the best. So, like middle school drama, but on a national level. Exactly, but with way more oil involved. And just like that, the United States and Britain launched Operation Ajax, a secret CIA plot to overthrow Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. For decades, people called it a conspiracy theory, but in 2013, the CIA themselves declassified official documents that confirmed they had planned the entire thing. This all started in the early 1950s when Iran had a prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, and this guy just wanted one thing: for Iran to control its own oil. And this plan was going to scatter everything Britain was doing in Iran. You see, at this time, Iran's oil was majorly being controlled by a British company known as BP, which meant Britain was making huge profits while Iran got chicken change. And the prime minister didn't like this at all, so they turned to the US and asked the American government to help them overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh. And wouldn't you know it, America agreed. So, the CIA, led by Kermit Roosevelt Jr., hatched a plan called Operation Ajax in 1953 and started trying to get the minister out. Their plan was to kick him out and then put the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, back in full power as an obedient Western ally. They bribed Iranian politicians and military officials, spread fake news in Iranian newspapers, claiming Mossadegh was corrupt, unstable, and secretly working for the Soviets, and even hired protesters to make it seem like the country hated Mossadegh, when in reality he was still popular. But eventually, they forced Mossadegh out, and with him gone, the Shah ruled Iran like an authoritarian king backed by the Savak, his secret police who were trained by, you guessed it, the CIA. The US and Britain got their oil profits back, and everyone in the West high-fived each other. The Manhattan Project. So basically, the Manhattan Project was the super-duper top-secret US government program during World War II that developed the first nuclear weapons. And by top secret, we mean even the Vice President of the United States didn't know about it until he became president. It all started when scientists realized that splitting atoms, a process called nuclear fission, explosion released an insane amount of energy. This meant that, in theory, a bomb could be made that was thousands of times more powerful than anything before. Well, the US government was not about to let Nazi Germany get their hands on this first, so in 1942, they got to work in total secrecy. The name Manhattan Project was actually a code name, because calling it Super Secret Doomsday Weapon Club would have been a dead giveaway. The building of this bomb was so big that some of the greatest scientific minds in history teamed up for this project, including J. Robert Oppenheimer and even Albert Einstein. After years of research, on July 16, 1945, they tested the first atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert. The test was called Trinity, and when it went off, it was way bigger than they expected. It created a blinding light, a massive shockwave, and a mushroom cloud that was bigger than anything they'd ever seen. It was literally so powerful that one scientist watching the test accidentally got a sunburn at night. Now, they had to make a choice on whether to use the bomb or not due to it being too powerful. Well, you already know what the US will do next. So on August 6, 1945, the US dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and another on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, in an effort to force Japan to surrender. And sadly, their plan worked because Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, effectively ending World War II, but the world had officially entered the atomic age, and nothing would ever be the same again. Operation Mockingbird. Basically, Operation Mockingbird was a covert CIA program that started in the late 1940s and took off in the 1950s. Their entire goal was to infiltrate major media outlets and use journalists as secret informants and propaganda pushers. Think of it as a Netflix original series, but instead of a thrilling political drama, it was real life, and instead of actors, the government was directing actual journalists. The agency paid off reporters, fed them stories, and even planted agents inside news organizations like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Time magazine. Basically, if there was a major headline, there was a chance Uncle Sam had a hand in it. And get this, some journalists weren't even aware they were being used. They'd get tips from high-level government sources and think they were just doing their job. Now, you see, for years, people who suggested the CIA controlled the media were written off as tinfoil hat-wearing weirdos. But then 1975 happened and everything that was hidden came to light. This was the year of the Church Committee, a congressional investigation into government abuses. Think of it as the government investigating itself, which is about as trustworthy as a fox running a chicken security firm. However, during this investigation, former CIA Director William Colby casually admitted that the CIA had assets in newsrooms across America. Senator Frank Church and his team found that the CIA had journalists on the payroll, fed them stories, and used them to influence public opinion both in the US and abroad. The CIA just justified Operation Mockingbird by saying they were only trying to control the narrative so those pesky Soviets wouldn't brainwash Americans first. Yeah, right. It was like a toxic relationship where your partner said, "I'm just checking your texts to make sure other people aren't lying to you." Thankfully, once the Church Committee spilled the tea in 1975, the CIA officially promised they totally wouldn't do it again. And did they actually stop? Well, let's just say the government has a habit of rebranding instead of retiring shady programs. Today, while there's no direct evidence that Operation Mockingbird is still in full swing, there's plenty of speculation that media manipulation never really stopped. It just got more sophisticated. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. Imagine you're a sailor, chilling on a US Navy destroyer in the middle of the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964 when someone suddenly yells that enemy boats are attacking. You scramble to your battle station. The captain starts giving orders, and within minutes, the ship is firing at targets in the dark. But then you realize there's absolutely nothing there. What if you just declared war on angry waves and hyperactive radar blips? Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, that's pretty much what happened with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. You see, for a very long time, people believed that the US exaggerated or flat out made up the Gulf of Tonkin incident to justify diving headfirst into the Vietnam War. According to the official story, on August 2nd, 1964, the US destroyer USS Maddox was allegedly attacked by 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The US fired back and damaged the enemy ships. Then, on August 4th, 1964, the USS Maddox and another destroyer destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, claimed they were attacked again in bad weather in the middle of the night, so they retaliated by firing into the darkness at what they thought were enemy boats. Then, President Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ for short, or Let's Bomb Just Because in this case, went on TV and told America, "We were attacked, so we must respond." This meant Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave LBJ the green light to unleash military action in Vietnam without an official war declaration. And just like that, America was neck-deep in a war that would last over a decade, all because of two sketchy naval encounters. For a pretty long time, people smelled something fishy, and many even suspected the second attack never happened, and that the US government exaggerated or misinterpreted events to justify war. Eventually, the truth came out, but it was nothing like we had thought. Apparently, the first attack was real, but the second was a paranoid overreaction. The government ran with the "we were attacked" narrative without verifying everything. Plus, LBJ, already looking for a reason to go to war, jumped on the opportunity. So instead of being a deliberate staged lie, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was more of a military game of telephone gone horribly wrong. It wasn't a conspiracy, just a mix of real conflict, miscommunication, and war fever. And the worst part was that this one misunderstanding helped spark a war that killed over 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese. Talk about a massive oops moment in history. The CIA's MK Ultra program. In the 1950s, it's safe to say that the US government was obsessed with one thing: outsmarting the Soviets. The CIA, like a kid who just discovered science fiction, decided that the best way to do this would be mind control. Yes, you heard that right. They didn't want to just spy on enemies, they wanted to control their thoughts. And for decades, MK Ultra was dismissed as a crazy conspiracy theory, right up there with lizard people and Bigfoot having a summer home in Ohio. But guess what? It was 100% real. You see, MK Ultra was a top-secret CIA program that started in 1953 to 1973, and they tried to control minds using drugs, hypnosis, and even torture. The idea was to create the ultimate Manchurian candidate, aka a brainwashed spy who could be programmed to do whatever the CIA wanted, like a human Alexa but with more electroshock therapy. The worst part about it was that they weren't even subtle about it. They slipped acid into people's drinks like a frat party gone wrong. Agents, prisoners, mental patients, no one was safe. And when that didn't work, they started using hypnosis. The CIA thought they could hypnotize people into becoming assassins. It turns out hypnosis is better for quitting smoking than creating brainwashed killers. Then when that didn't do the trick, they graduated to sleep deprivation, but the only thing that managed to do was make their brains start acting like slow, glitchy, unpredictable Wi-Fis. They even ran an operation called Operation Midnight Climax. Yes, really, and there they hired sex workers to lure men into CIA-controlled rooms, drugged them with LSD, and watched them from behind a two-way mirror. Turns out LSD didn't make people easier to control, it made them think they were God, forget their names, or try to pet walls. Most experiments led to delirium, paranoia, and lifelong trauma. One of the most famous victims was a CIA scientist named Frank Olson who was dosed with LSD without his knowledge. The poor man spiraled into a breakdown and mysteriously fell to his death from a 13th floor window. The CIA called it an accident, but Olson's family was not so convinced. Eventually, in the 1970s, the government was forced to admit MK Ultra was real because some classified documents didn't get shredded in time. Congress held hearings, the CIA shrugged, and Americans learned their government had been running a real-life horror movie. CIA's Iran-Contra affair. There was a time in the 1980s when the US government really wanted to stop communism in Latin America. Meanwhile, during this same time, there was a nasty war going on in Nicaragua. A rebel group called the Contras was fighting against the leftist Sandinista government, which was backed by the Soviet Union. President Ronald Reagan and his team loved the Contras, like adopt a rebel group level of love. But there was a huge problem. Congress had made it illegal to fund the Contras. Yes, you heard that right. Congress passed a law called the Boland Amendment, which basically told the CIA they could not, under any circumstances, give these rebels money or weapons. Naturally, the CIA, being the CIA, thought that simply meant they shouldn't use tax dollars. So they just started doing some black market deals instead. I guess these guys seriously had a problem following orders. Now, at the same time this was happening, the US had a problem with Iraq Iran because the country was still salty over a little thing called the Iranian Revolution, and some terrorist groups were holding American hostages in Lebanon. The official U.S. policy was, we do not negotiate with terrorists. But behind closed doors, some government officials were striking deals. So the U.S. secretly sold weapons to Iran. Yes, the same country they were technically not supposed to be helping, and in exchange, Iran would use its influence to get American hostages released. And then they'd use the money gotten from the illegal weapons sales to secretly fund the Contras in Nicaragua, which was beyond illegal. That's simply how the Iran-Contra affair was born. Everything was going smoothly, if you consider violating international laws smooth, until 1986, when a Lebanese newspaper exposed the whole operation. At first, Reagan denied everything, but as evidence piled up and documents started surfacing, it revealed that the whole thing was 100% real. The CIA, the Pentagon, even the White House were all involved in an illegal arms deal. What followed next was one of the most dramatic political trials ever. People were shredding documents, deleting evidence, and throwing each other under the bus faster than a reality TV reunion show. NSA mass surveillance. Ever wonder why Google, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft seem to know you better than your own mom? Well, apparently because they've been listening. The NSA has been spying on you, your grandma, and even your dog for decades. It all came to light on June 2013 when Edward Snowden, a former NSA contractor, leaked classified documents showing that the US government, through the National Security Agency, NSA, was running a secret surveillance program so massive that even Santa Claus would have called it too much snooping. They were able to do this through a program called PRISM, so that means every email, video call, and even those I miss you messages you sent to your ex at 2 a.m. were seen by the NSA, and they probably judged you for it. The NSA even tapped into undersea internet cables. Yes, under the ocean. So if you thought the deep sea was just full of fish and shipwrecks, it turns out it was also full of government eavesdroppers. Of course, in classic American moves, they didn't stop at spying on regular people, but they also listened in on foreign leaders, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Needless to say, when the news got out, some world leaders were not amused. Once Snowden spilled the tea, he fled the country to Russia while the US government scrambled to do damage control. First, they said it was all done to stop terrorists. Yeah, right, because Grandma Betty's phone calls about knitting patterns are a national security threat. Eventually, new laws were passed, like the USA Freedom Act, to limit government surveillance, but let's be real, they just made it slightly less obvious.